Is social distancing really necessary? In the Netherlands, social distancing means keeping everyone 1.5 meters apart in public. By keeping that distance, you are safe from the virus. But is this the new normal? Or is it a false sense of security? Our group has compared studies from around the world, and we see something remarkable. To begin with, we see patterns that are in complete opposition to the current Dutch strategy. Here are a few examples. How is it that there have been no major outbreaks on Lesbos and in other refugee camps when they are unable to observe the 1.5 meter distance? How is it possible that in Africa and India, with many more inhabitants, there are significantly fewer deaths than in the Netherlands, while they are also densely populated? What can explain the Seattle church choir, which observed 1.5 meter distancing during their rehearsals and yet still became 75% infected? And how is it possible that, according to studies in China, South Korea, and Germany, only 10 to 35% of a patient's housemates become infected, even though they are regularly within the 1.5 meters of the patient in the home? If we look at these examples and read the studies, we come to the conclusion that the 1.5 meter rule does not provide adequate safety. In order to come up with the best approach, we first have to know the real cause. Do we become infected because we get close to an infected person, coming in contact with the droplets emitted by their coughing, sneezing, or talking? Or does the contamination occur in another way? This is what we concluded from the latest studies. The contamination mostly occurs via microdroplets called aerosols. If you are only briefly in contact with the aerosols, you will not get sick, or possibly so lightly that you don't even notice. But if you stay in contact for a longer period, the risk of infection increases. The longer the contact, the stronger the infection. This animation comes from a video by a renowned Japanese professor of virology. In it, you can see that aerosols can remain in a closed atmosphere for a longer time.
About 10 people in an enclosed space the size of a classroom. A person coughs once and spreads about 100,000 droplets. Large droplets are shown in blue and green. Most of these fall to the ground within 1 minute, but the microdroplets, shown in red, continue to drift. This simulation uses only microdroplets. 20 minutes later, the microdroplets are still floating in place.
Taking this concept as a basis, it also explains why people get infected at superspread events, such as Carnival, après-ski bars, and church services. There, only one person has to be infected and emit aerosols, and since the surrounding people remain in the area for a longer period of time, they get infected. This concept also explains why there is no outbreak in many refugee camps. The houses and tents there are relatively poorly insulated, which does ensure more optimal ventilation. Thus, the air is more effectively circulated. The church choir in Seattle did observe proper social distancing, but they stayed in a closed space for the entire rehearsal where the aerosols could remain and unfortunately be inhaled by many members. The studies also showed that there were virtually no infections in outdoor environments because the aerosols are effectively dispersed outside. And we could give more examples. Look at cruise ships and many healthcare institutions with ventilation systems that don't effectively remove stale air and replace it with fresh air, but instead circulate the infected air throughout the system, the aerosols remaining inside. Looking at the evidence as we see it, the new 1.5 meter rules therefore constitute a false sense of safety. It's not about the distance. It's about the risk of inhaling aerosols over a prolonged period. That means, in the open air, it is virtually impossible to become infected. Indoors, good ventilation is essential. And higher humidity, which evidence shows can ensure that aerosols have a harder time remaining long. If all of the above fails, yes, use mouth coverings. On one hand, so that contagious people can spread as few aerosols as possible, and on the other hand, so that the uninfected can inhale as few aerosols as possible. If you take these findings into consideration, you may ask, why exactly do we have to keep 1.5 meter distance while outside, on terraces, at the beach, or at sporting events? Why can't the bar and restaurant industry reopen more fully if they can assure the proper ventilation? And why are we thought to be safe in buildings such as schools, offices, and shops by keeping 1.5 meter distance while proper ventilation is not being considered? Our initiative is concerned that the 1.5 meter measures are based on incorrect principles, with great risks to our society and to the economy. SmartExit.nu. Let's get through this smarter, safer, and faster.